I've always wondered what it would be like to be the main actor in a horror movie. You know, the one where everything goes wrong and every turn you make leads you deeper into danger. But what if, instead of watching from the safety of my couch, I found myself living through it? Imagine being in a place where survival depends on every decision you make, where the wilderness is not just untamed but hiding something far worse than you could ever imagine. What if I was the one taking that wrong turn? In this world, the woods aren't just trees and shadows. There's something lurking behind every creak of a branch, every whisper of the wind. I wouldn't just be acting in a movie. This would be real life. The fear would be real. The blood, the terror, the racing heartbeats, they wouldn't be scripted. They'd be mine. And the creatures hunting me? Well, they wouldn't stop just because the director said, "Cut." This is my story. A story of a road trip gone horribly wrong, of friends lost to the woods, and of a relentless fight for survival against things I never believed existed. What if I was the main actor in Wrong Turn? Would I survive? Or would I become another victim of the monsters hiding in the trees? We were supposed to be on a simple road trip. Nothing special, just a weekend getaway with friends. But as we drove deeper into the wilderness, the road stretched out like an endless snake, winding through the trees. The map I held in my hand seemed useless, the lines and roads no longer matching up with what we were seeing outside the car. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" asked Carly from the back seat, her voice carrying a hint of nervousness. I glanced at the map again, squinting at the faded lines. "Yeah, this is the only road that cuts through. We should be fine." But even as I said it, there was a sinking feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. The road was too quiet. No other cars, no signs, just us, the trees, and the endless stretch of asphalt. Scott, sitting next to Carly, leaned forward. "Maybe we should turn back. This doesn't feel right." "We're already halfway there," I said, trying to sound confident. But the truth was, I wasn't sure. We had missed the main highway exit earlier and were now following what looked like a shortcut on the map. The shortcut was supposed to save us time, but instead, it felt like we were driving into the unknown. As the trees loomed taller and the road narrowed, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A rusted sign, barely visible through the overgrown bushes. Bear Mountain Road. The name didn't ring any bells. It wasn't on the map. "Look, there's a sign. We're on the right track," I said, more to reassure myself than anyone else. Jess, who was sitting next to me in the passenger seat, sighed. "This better be the right way. I'm starving." The road twisted and turned, and the feeling of being lost grew stronger. The sunlight was fading, casting long shadows through the trees. We had been driving for hours, and still there was no sign of civilization. Just more trees, more shadows, more silence. Then, without warning, a loud thud echoed through the car, and the steering wheel jerked out of my hands. The car swerved violently to the right, tires screeching as we skidded off the road and into a ditch. "What the hell was that?" Scott shouted, gripping the back of my seat as the car came to a stop. I exhaled sharply, my hand still gripping the wheel. "I don't know." My heart was pounding. I got out of the car, my feet sinking into the soft earth as I walked around to the front. The front tire was blown, a thick branch lodged into the side of it. "We hit something," I said, more to myself than to the others. Jess climbed out of the car, arms crossed. "Great, just great. Now what?" Carly stepped out, her eyes scanning the woods nervously. "I don't like this. It's getting dark. We need to find help." Scott checked his phone, holding it up to the sky. No signal. Typical. I took a deep breath, trying to think. "Okay, we passed a gas station about an hour back. I'll walk back and see if I can get help." Jess shook her head. "You're not going alone. We'll all go." We grabbed our bags and started walking back the way we came. But as we made our way down the road, something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, as if the woods themselves were watching us. Every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant rustling of branches. And then, we saw it. A small cabin, hidden behind the trees, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. "Maybe someone's home," Carly suggested. We approached cautiously, the old wooden door creaking as Scott pushed it open. The inside was dark, musty, like no one had lived there for years, but there were signs of life: an old stove, a broken chair, and something far more disturbing. On the wall, a collection of newspaper clippings, articles about missing hikers, campers who had disappeared without a trace. Jess stepped back, her face pale. "We need to leave, now." But before we could move, the door slammed shut behind us. The next few hours were a blur, a nightmare that seemed too real to be true. As we ran through the woods, we realized we weren't alone. Something or someone was hunting us. They knew these woods better than we ever could, and no matter how fast we ran, no matter how far we tried to go, they were always one step ahead. It wasn't just a wrong turn, it was a trap, a twisted game of survival where the rules were simple: run, hide, and try to stay alive. But deep down, I knew that the woods had already claimed us. We bolted through the woods, the thick branches clawing at our clothes and skin as we tried to find a way out. I could hear Carly's breath coming in short, panicked gasps behind me, and Scott's heavy footsteps not far behind. The sun was almost gone now, the trees casting long, twisted shadows that made it harder to see the path ahead. The fear was real. It wasn't the kind of fear you felt watching a movie or reading a scary story. This was primal, a deep, gut-wrenching terror that clawed at your insides and made it hard to think. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of it almost drowning out the rustling in the bushes behind us. "We can't keep running like this," Jess shouted from beside me, her voice trembling with fear. "We're going to get lost. We're already lost," I snapped, pushing through another set of branches. My legs were aching, my lungs burning, but I couldn't stop. Stopping wasn't an option. Then Scott shouted, "Wait, stop!" His voice was frantic, and we all skidded to a halt, panting and desperate. He pointed ahead. Through the trees, we could make out the faint outline of a dirt road. It wasn't the one we'd been on, but it was something. We ran toward it, and as we burst through the underbrush onto the road, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find help. A car, a house, anything. But then, as if on cue, a low, rumbling engine echoed in the distance. We all froze. I turned to Jess, who was already shaking her head, her eyes wide with terror. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." The sound of the engine grew louder, and soon, headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. It wasn't a friendly car, though. This was something much worse. The old rusted truck barreling toward us looked like it had crawled straight out of a nightmare. Its headlights were blinding, and as it drew closer, I could make out the twisted, grinning faces of the people inside. "They found us," Carly whispered, her voice trembling. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Jess's arm and pulling her back into the woods. The others followed, but it was too late. The truck veered off the road, crashing through the trees and following us with terrifying speed. The sound of its engine roared behind us, and I could hear the laughter of the people inside, laughter that sent chills down my spine. Branches snapped and bushes rustled as we sprinted deeper into the woods. My legs felt like lead, every step harder than the last, but the thought of stopping wasn't an option. I could still hear the truck behind us, crashing through the trees, its headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. But then suddenly the truck stopped. The engine sputtered and died, leaving only the eerie silence of the woods around us. I glanced back, heart racing. The truck was still there, its headlights dimmed now, but the people inside, they were gone. "They're coming after us on foot," Scott panted, his eyes darting around wildly. "Keep moving," I urged. "We need to put as much distance between us and them as possible." We kept running, our footsteps echoing through the forest. The trees seemed to close in on us, the branches like fingers reaching out to pull us back. Every shadow looked like a figure lurking just beyond the edge of our vision, and every sound made me jump. After what felt like hours of running, we finally stumbled upon a small clearing. In the middle of it stood a rickety old watchtower, the wooden structure creaking in the wind. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing around that offered any kind of safety. "Up there!" Carly pointed. Without another word, we ran toward it. The ladder leading up to the top was old and splintered, but we didn't care. One by one, we climbed, hearts racing, muscles burning. When I reached the top, I pulled myself onto the wooden platform and looked down. The forest stretched out below us, dark and endless. "Do you think they'll find us up here?" Jess asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, staring down at the path we had just taken. There was no sign of the truck, no sign of the people who had been chasing us, but that didn't mean they weren't out there. We huddled together, trying to catch our breath. The wind howled through the trees, making the whole tower creak and sway. I glanced around, looking for any sign of help, anything that might give us hope, but there was nothing. Just the darkness and the suffocating silence. Scott checked his phone again, but there was still no signal. "We're stuck here," he muttered. "No one's coming to help us." "We can't stay up here forever," Carly said. "They'll find us eventually." I knew she was right. As much as I wanted to believe that the watchtower was safe, that it was some kind of refuge, deep down, I knew it wasn't. If those people found us, and I had no doubt they were still out there, this tower wouldn't protect us. But for now, we had no other choice. The night dragged on, the tension between us growing thicker with each passing hour. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind made us jump. We were all on edge, waiting for something to happen, waiting for the nightmare to begin again. And then, just as the first rays of dawn began to break through the trees, we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from below. "They found us," Jess whispered, her face pale. I looked down, my heart pounding in my chest. Through the gaps in the wooden platform, I could see them. 3 figures standing at the base of the watchtower, staring up at us with twisted, hungry smiles. This was it. The nightmare was far from over, and there was no way out. The moment I saw their faces, I knew we were in deep trouble. The way they looked up at us with those sick, twisted grins. These weren't just ordinary people. There was something deeply wrong with them. They moved with a disturbing sense of confidence, like they knew exactly what they were going to do to us and were savoring every second of it. Scott backed away from the edge of the platform, his face pale. "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. My mind raced, searching for any possible escape, but there wasn't one. We were trapped. The only way down was the ladder, and they were right at the bottom of it, waiting. Jess was shaking, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles were white. "We can't stay up here. They're going to come up." "They don't have any weapons," I said, trying to sound calm, though I wasn't. "Maybe we can fight them off." But as soon as I said it, one of the figures, a hulking man with a disfigured face, reached down and picked up something from the ground. It was an axe, its blade rusted but still sharp. He grinned up at us, raising it high like a trophy. "We're not going to win a fight against that," Carly muttered, her voice trembling. The man with the axe took a step forward, placing one foot on the bottom rung of the ladder. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. He was coming up. They were coming up. And there was nowhere for us to go. "They're going to kill us," Scott whispered, his voice barely audible. "Not if we fight back," I said, though the words felt hollow. What could we do against these monsters? What chance did we have? The man with the axe placed his boot on the first rung of the ladder, testing it. The old wood creaked under his weight, but it held. He grinned up at us with a twisted smile that sent chills down my spine. He started climbing. I scanned the platform, desperately searching for anything we could use to defend ourselves. The watchtower was old and falling apart, but there were a few loose boards scattered around, rotting from age. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. "We can't let them get up here," I shouted, trying to rally everyone. "Grab whatever you can and be ready." Jess, Carly, and Scott scrambled to pick up the loose boards. They were heavy and splintered, but at least they could be used to hit back. I grabbed the largest piece I could find, gripping it tightly in my hands. My heart raced, every second feeling like an eternity as the man with the axe slowly made his way up the ladder. "They're going to kill us!" Carly's voice was shaking as she looked down at the approaching figures. "They're not going to make it up here," I said, trying to sound confident even though I didn't feel it. "We're going to stop them." The man with the axe was halfway up now, his disfigured face illuminated by the faint light of the rising sun. Behind him, the other two figures waited, watching with cruel amusement. This was a game to them, a twisted hunt. Jess stood beside me, gripping her board with trembling hands. "What do we do if he makes it up here?" "We don't let him," I said, my mind racing. "When he's close enough, we knock him off." But before we could act, Scott stepped forward, gripping his board like a baseball bat. He took a deep breath, eyes locked on the man climbing the ladder. "I'm not waiting," he muttered. And before any of us could stop him, he swung the board down with all his strength. The board connected with the man's arm, a sickening crack echoing through the air as he let out a grunt of pain. But he didn't fall. He barely even flinched. Instead, he gripped the ladder even tighter, using his free hand to grab the axe. He was too strong, too determined. Scott's face went pale as he realized his mistake. He had only made the man angrier. "He's not stopping!" Jess screamed. I acted on instinct. I swung my own board, aiming for his hand on the ladder. The impact sent splinters flying, and this time the man lost his grip. For a split second, he teetered on the edge, his twisted face contorted with rage. Then, with a howl, he fell. The sound of his body hitting the ground below was sickening, but there was no time to process it. The other two figures didn't waste a second. One of them, a woman with wild hair and a scarred face, rushed forward, grabbing the axe that had slipped from the man's hand. She looked up at us, her eyes filled with a burning hatred. "They're not giving up," Scott whispered, backing away from the edge. I stared down at the two figures, my mind racing. We had stopped one of them, but there were still more, and we were trapped. There was no escape, no way to outrun them. "They'll keep coming," Carly said, her voice trembling. "They'll climb up again." She was right. We couldn't stay in the watchtower forever. Eventually, they would find a way up, or worse, they'd start chopping it down with that axe. We needed a plan, and fast. "We have to get out of here," I said, glancing around the platform. "There's no way we can fight them off forever." "How?" Jess asked, her eyes wide with fear. "They're waiting for us down there." I looked down at the ladder, my mind working overtime. The clearing below was small, surrounded by thick trees. If we could make it into the woods, we might be able to lose them, at least for a little while. "We climb down the back," I said, pointing to the far side of the platform where the ladder was less visible from below. "If we're quiet, we can slip into the woods before they notice." Scott shook his head. "That's insane. They'll hear us." "Do you have a better idea?" I shot back. The adrenaline was still pumping through my veins, the reality of our situation pressing down on me. "We either take the chance or wait up here until they find a way to kill us." Jess nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'll go first." "No," I said, gripping her arm. "I'll go. If I make it, you follow." She hesitated but then nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. I slowly made my way to the back of the platform, careful not to make a sound. The wood creaked beneath my feet, and every noise felt like a scream in the silence of the woods. My heart pounded in my chest as I lowered myself onto the ladder, the rough wood digging into my hands. I glanced down. The ground seemed impossibly far away, but I couldn't afford to think about that now. I needed to focus on getting down and getting away. Step by step, I descended the ladder, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Every second felt like an eternity. But finally, I reached the bottom. The moment my feet touched the ground, I crouched low, pressing myself against the base of the watchtower. I glanced up, but there was no sign that the figures had noticed me. I waved up at the others, signaling them to follow. One by one, they climbed down, moving as quietly as they could. When we were all on the ground, we huddled together, the reality of our situation sinking in. "We need to get out of here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Into the trees, stay low, stay quiet." We moved quickly, slipping into the dense underbrush at the edge of the clearing. The woods seemed darker now, the shadows deeper, but I didn't care. As long as we were hidden, we had a chance. We crouched low, making our way through the trees as quietly as possible. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart skip a beat. But we kept moving. The only sounds were the pounding of my heart and the distant wind whispering through the branches. For a moment I thought we had made it. We were deeper into the woods now, the watchtower far behind us. But then, from somewhere behind us, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. "They're following us," Jess whispered, her eyes wide with terror. I glanced over my shoulder, my breath catching in my throat. Through the trees I could just make out the faint outline of the two figures, moving through the woods like predators stalking their prey. "They're not going to stop," Carly said, her voice trembling. "They'll keep coming until they find us." I knew she was right. We had escaped the watchtower, but we were still being hunted. The game wasn't over. And in these woods there was no way out. We kept moving, ducking through the thick branches and weaving between the trees. Every step was a struggle as our feet sank into the muddy forest floor, and the eerie quiet around us only amplified the pounding of my heart. I could feel the eyes of those hunters on us, even when I couldn't see them. Their footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, closer than I wanted them to be. "We can't keep running forever," Scott panted, his voice shaking as he glanced behind us. "They're going to catch up." "They won't if we keep going," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. My legs were burning and my mind raced with fear and exhaustion. But we had no choice. If we stopped, even for a second, they'd close in. Jess stumbled over a root, barely catching herself. "We need a plan," she said, her voice tight with panic. "We can't just keep running aimlessly." "I know," I muttered, scanning the forest for any sign of a way out. But all I could see were more trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. The woods were a maze, and I had no idea how far we were from any kind of help. The road we had found earlier seemed like a distant memory, and there was no guarantee we'd find anything like it again. But then, just as despair started to settle in, I spotted something through the trees, an old cabin, barely visible in the fading light. It was run down and dilapidated, but it was shelter. It was something. "There!" I pointed, and the others followed my gaze. "A cabin," Carly breathed. "Do you think—" "It's the only option we've got," I said, already moving toward it. "Come on." We hurried through the trees, our footsteps quick and silent. The cabin loomed closer, its weathered wood covered in moss and ivy, the windows broken and the door hanging off its hinges. It looked abandoned, probably had been for years, but right now, it felt like our only chance. We reached the porch and I pushed open the door, cringing as it let out a loud creak. The inside was just as run down as the outside, dusty with broken furniture scattered around and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. But it was shelter, and if we were lucky, maybe it would be enough to keep those maniacs at bay. "We'll barricade the door," I said, already moving toward an old rotting table in the corner. "Block the windows if we can." Scott helped me lift the table and we shoved it against the door. Jess and Carly grabbed whatever they could, broken chairs, a rusty old stove, and piled it in front of the windows. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As soon as we finished, we huddled together in the center of the cabin, the reality of our situation pressing down on us. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing. "Do you think they'll find us here?" Carly whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "They'll try," I said, my voice low. "But we'll be ready." But even as I said the words, doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. We were in the middle of nowhere, trapped in a cabin that looked like it could fall apart at any second. And those people, those twisted, relentless hunters, were out there, somewhere in the woods, searching for us. The minutes ticked by in silence, every creak of the old cabin making us jump. My hands gripped the broken board I had grabbed earlier, my heart racing as I strained to listen for any sign of movement outside. Then, suddenly there it was, the sound of footsteps crunching through the leaves. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, closer. They were here. "They found us," Jess whispered, her voice barely audible. I held up a hand, signaling for everyone to stay quiet. We couldn't make a sound. Maybe, just maybe, if we stayed still, they'd pass by without noticing us. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. The footsteps stopped just outside the cabin, and I could hear them breathing, hear the low murmur of their voices. My heart pounded in my chest as I tightened my grip on the board, ready for whatever was coming next. And then, with a sudden violent crash, the door burst open, the barricade shattering as the hulking figure from before stormed into the cabin. His disfigured face twisted into a cruel grin as he raised the axe high above his head. Scott lunged forward, swinging his board at the man, but it barely fazed him. The axe came down with terrifying speed, and Scott barely dodged out of the way. The others screamed, scrambling to get away as the man charged toward us, his eyes wild with bloodlust. I swung my own board at him, aiming for his head, but he blocked it with the axe, sending splinters flying through the air. The force of the blow knocked me backward, and I stumbled, barely keeping my balance. "We have to get out!" Carly screamed, darting toward the back of the cabin. But as she reached the door, one of the other figures appeared, blocking her path. It was the scarred woman, a twisted smile on her face as she raised a long, serrated knife. "We're trapped," Jess whispered, her eyes wide with terror. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. The cabin was falling apart, and we were cornered. The hunters were closing in, their eyes filled with a sick, twisted satisfaction. They enjoyed this game of cat and mouse. To them, we were just prey. I could see it in their faces. They wanted to draw this out, to make it last. They were savoring our fear. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged forward, swinging the board at the man with the axe. This time, I aimed for his legs, and with a sickening crunch, it connected. He let out a roar of pain, stumbling backward as he clutched his knee. "Run!" I shouted, and without hesitation, the others bolted for the back of the cabin. The scarred woman tried to stop us, but Jess grabbed a chair and threw it at her, knocking her off balance. We sprinted through the broken door, out into the woods, the sounds of our pursuers fading behind us as we ran for our lives. The forest swallowed us up again, the trees looming over us like silent sentinels. We didn't stop, didn't look back. The only thing that mattered was getting away, putting as much distance between us and those monsters as possible. But even as we ran, I knew this wasn't over. They wouldn't stop, not until they had us. And out here in the endless dark woods, there was no one to save us. The game had only just begun.